see, the train doesn't stop at Tucumcari.
This train will stop at Tucumcari.
So I got back to the plant the next day. That was a Friday. I told my boss, who had been on stage himself, and he said, "You're fired."
Few people in the film industry held as much contempt for John Wayne as Lee Van Cleef did. Born on January 9, 1925 in Somerville, New Jersey, Van Cleef didn't come from a background that pointed to fame. His early life was quiet and structured, shaped by a working-class family and a father who repaired watches for a living. The skills Van Cleef picked up at home, precision, patience, and discipline, stuck with him for the rest of his life. Before acting ever came into the picture, he served in the U.S. Navy during World War II, working as a radio operator and seeing active duty. These real-life experiences toughened him and added a sense of grit to the characters he later played on screen. Initially, Van Cleef had no plans to become an actor. After the war, he studied engineering, but soon discovered that the classroom couldn't hold his interest. It wasn't long before he was drawn to the stage, and, eventually, to Hollywood. Like many actors breaking in, his early roles were small and mostly went unnoticed. He appeared in background parts, usually playing quiet but intimidating figures, often with no dialogue at all. One of these early performances was in High Noon, 1952, where his silent, piercing stare was enough to leave an impression even without a single spoken line. Van Cleef's looks worked in his favor. His sharp cheekbones, narrow eyes, and serious expression gave him a natural edge. These traits landed him role after role as outlaws, criminals, and cold-hearted gunmen. Through the 1950s and into the early 60s, he continued to build a steady resume, though he struggled to find work beyond typecast parts. Things didn't come easily. He wasn't a major star, and a car accident in the late 1950s threatened to derail his progress completely. It caused long-term physical issues that made it harder for him to perform certain roles. Despite these setbacks, everything changed in the mid-60s when director Sergio Leone brought him into the world of Italian westerns. Leone was looking for someone who could deliver menace without overacting, and Van Cleef fit that mold perfectly. His breakout came in For a Few Dollars More, 1965, where he played a rival bounty hunter opposite Clint Eastwood. But it was his role in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966, that fully launched him into stardom. As Angel Eyes, a cold and ruthless killer, Van Cleef didn't just play a villain, he became the standard for them. The performance added subtlety and depth to a type of role that had often been flat or cartoonish in older westerns. His reputation grew, not because of flashy fame, but through steady, impactful work. He became a go-to actor for filmmakers who wanted to break away from the traditional, overly clean image of Western heroes. While others wore white hats and stood for idealized justice, Van Cleef brought something more grounded and raw to the screen. Van Cleef had a very distinct look. His angular face, pronounced cheekbones, and intense eyes gave him a powerful screen presence. His film career included many memorable roles in westerns. In For a Few Dollars More, 1965, he played Colonel Douglas Mortimer, a clever and skilled outlaw. In The Big Gundown, 1966, he took on the role of a former lawman chasing down a fugitive. These performances helped establish him as one of the top Western stars. His villains weren't flat or basic. He added weight and personality to his characters, making them more than just evil for the sake of it. Often, his roles were guided by their own personal codes, even when they clashed with law or society. In films like Death Rides a Horse, 1967, and Day of Anger, 1967, He played older gunslingers who carried a sense of wisdom and sadness, giving his characters emotional depth, even though they lived outside the rules. His ability to show both toughness and vulnerability made him a strong presence on screen and a favorite among fans of the genre. Though westerns made him famous, Van Cleef's skills weren't limited to that one style. In the 1970s and 1980s, he began taking on different kinds of roles, appearing in action films and on television. His strong voice and confident appearance made him well suited for these parts. In Escape from New York, 1981, he played Hawk, a threatening figure who matched the film's gritty tone. He also starred in The Octagon, 1980, alongside Chuck Norris, stepping into the martial arts action world. These films helped him connect with younger audiences and showed that he could do more than just westerns. On TV, he took on roles in series like The Master, 1984, where he played a martial arts master paired with actor Timothy Van Patten. His move to television helped him gain more fans and highlighted his ability to perform in various kinds of roles. Outside of acting, Van Cleef's private life was filled with both deep relationships and personal challenges. His first marriage was to Patsy Ruth Kiley in 1943, during a very important stage of his early life. At the time, Van Cleef was in his late teens and early 20s, trying to manage both his career and personal life. Together, he and Patsy raised 3 children: David, Alan, and Deborah Van Cleef. Balancing family life with the unpredictable schedule of an actor was likely difficult. Van Cleef was often away due to filming, and that kind of lifestyle can put strain on any relationship. After 15 years together, the couple divorced in 1958. This period was also professionally tough for Van Cleef, as his career faced a slowdown around the same time. After divorcing Patsy, Van Cleef stepped into a new phase of his personal life when he married Joan Marjorie Drain in 1960. His relationship with Joan happened during an especially notable time in his career. After doing a number of supporting roles in westerns and taking a break following a serious car accident that almost ended his career, Van Cleef's luck began to shift. Things turned around when Sergio Leone gave him a major role in For a Few Dollars More in 1965. These roles completely changed how Hollywood saw him, moving him from being a dependable character actor to someone who could lead a film. Joan was with him throughout this shift, witnessing his rise to international fame. But with that level of success, likely came heavy pressure. Even though they experienced this critical period together, their marriage came to an end in 1974, after 14 years. 2 years later, in 1976, Van Cleef got married again, this time to Barbara Havalone. This marriage would last until the end of his life. His third marriage seemed to bring some calm after the challenges he had faced in both his personal and professional life. Barbara stayed by his side during his later years when his health started to fail. Even though he was dealing with heart issues and lingering problems from earlier injuries, Van Cleef kept working in film through the 1970s and 1980s, although the roles were smaller than what he once had. Barbara was always there for him, and when he died in 1989 from a heart attack, Barbara was still with him. Their marriage had lasted 13 years and covered the time when Van Cleef slowly stepped away from the spotlight. His personal life was also shaped by a unique accident that left a clear physical mark. While building a playhouse for his daughter Deborah, he lost the tip of his middle finger on his right hand. This event captured both sides of who he was: someone tough on screen, but also a caring father at home. Losing part of his finger didn't hurt his career. In some ways, it added to the hard-edged image he often portrayed. Most viewers didn't even notice the missing joint because Van Cleef was skilled at hiding it during scenes. But to those who worked closely with him, it became a small but memorable part of who he was, a symbol of what he gave up for his family. The injury probably needed a lot of medical care and time to heal. Still, Van Cleef didn't let it keep him away from acting for long. He stayed committed to his work and to being a father. Lee Van Cleef disliked him more than anyone else. His relationship with John Wayne was filled with tension and dislike, going far beyond simple professional competition. To someone on the outside, it might seem odd that two major actors in the same genre had such strong negative feelings toward each other. But behind closed doors, their clashing personalities, political opinions, work habits, and different paths in Hollywood helped fuel a long-lasting feud. Van Cleef, who became known for his sharp looks and intense roles in spaghetti westerns, never cared for John Wayne, who stood as the face of American westerns and often played the proud, heroic cowboy. Their mutual dislike became a well-known part of Hollywood gossip, lasting for years and affecting how they interacted in the industry. One major reason Van Cleef couldn't stand Wayne was because of how different their acting methods were. Van Cleef used method acting and got deeply into his characters. He focused on every detail and often portrayed dark, morally gray roles with a serious tone. Wayne, by contrast, usually played the same kind of role over and over, the strong, silent man who represented old-school values and toughness. To Van Cleef, that kind of acting seemed flat and lacking any real depth. He saw Wayne's dependence on his public image instead of developing range as a sign that Wayne wasn't really challenging himself. To Van Cleef, Wayne stood for the shallow side of the movie business, using his fame instead of skill to succeed. Their political views only made the divide bigger. Wayne was known for being very conservative. He loudly supported right-wing politics and believed strongly in American nationalism. He backed the Vietnam War and became a public voice for old-fashioned American ideals, especially during the social changes of the 1960s and 70s. Van Cleef didn't talk as much about his political opinions, but he leaned more toward progressive thinking and supported the counterculture movement that criticized U.S. foreign policy and questioned traditional norms. He supposedly found Wayne's political speeches annoying and saw his strong backing of war and conservative values as narrow-minded. To Van Cleef, Wayne's public image looked no different from the roles he always played. The stubborn, self-assured cowboy who couldn't see the world in a more complex way. Their political clash made the professional tension between them feel even more personal. On top of that, their different ways of handling fame and building careers in Hollywood added more friction. John Wayne reached superstardom early in his career and held on to his A-list position throughout his time in Hollywood. He was adored by fans and viewed as a national hero, which gave him a level of power and control over his films that few actors could match. Van Cleef, in contrast, had a much more uneven path in the movie business. Early on, he was regularly cast in secondary roles as the villain, usually overshadowed by lead actors like Wayne. It wasn't until the 1960s, through the rise of spaghetti westerns and his work in Sergio Leone's films, such as For a Few Dollars More and The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly, that Van Cleef finally earned recognition as a leading man. Even then, his level of fame never reached what Wayne had achieved, and Van Cleef held on to a sense of frustration over how long Hollywood had kept him in the background, while stars like Wayne stayed in the spotlight. He believed that actors like Wayne dominated the attention and opportunities, making it difficult for others to break through. That feeling helped build a lasting bitterness toward Wayne. There were also personal reasons for the tension between them, based on their off-screen interactions. Van Cleef reportedly saw Wayne as arrogant and overbearing, both on film sets and in social settings. Wayne's strong personality extended far beyond the characters he played, and he was known for trying to control the production process, often insisting on having everything done according to his preferences. Van Cleef, who was quieter and more withdrawn in private, disliked this kind of behavior and often steered clear of events where Wayne would be present. On set, when they did interact, people around them often sensed the tension. Wayne, according to some accounts, looked down on Van Cleef's acting, seeing him mainly as a character actor who did well in villain roles but lacked the appeal to be a real leading star. Van Cleef found this view insulting and believed that Wayne's fame had more to do with good timing and fortunate breaks than actual talent. Their professional rivalry was made worse by the fact that both actors were trying to stand out in the same genre during its peak years. Wayne was the face of the classic Hollywood Western, where the lines between good and bad were clearly drawn. Van Cleef, on the other hand, became associated with the grittier, more morally complicated characters in spaghetti westerns. Films like The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly stood in sharp contrast to Wayne's more traditional work, like The Searchers or True Grit. Van Cleef believed his type of western was more honest in its portrayal of the real world, while Wayne's films pushed an outdated view of American pride and frontier justice. This difference in how they represented the Wild West added even more strain to their already troubled relationship. Van Cleef thought Wayne's approach to Western heroes was overly simple and failed to capture the complicated moral issues found in actual history. In the end, the conflict between Van Cleef and Wayne wasn't just about roles or public image. It came down to a deeper clash in beliefs and ideals. Van Cleef's resentment ran deeper than career rivalry. Wayne stood for a version of American history and a Hollywood structure that Van Cleef had always struggled against. To him, Wayne symbolized everything that made it harder for actors like himself to succeed. That resentment never faded, staying with him for the rest of his life. While both became legends, their ongoing feud remains a lasting part of Hollywood's history, as talked about as the films they appeared in. Lee Van Cleef died on December 16, 1989, at the age of 64, from a heart attack. His passing marked the close of a chapter in Western cinema, as he was one of the last major stars of the genre. Even after his death, Van Cleef's legacy lives on through the large number of films he left behind. He changed how villains were portrayed in Westerns, turning roles that could have been forgettable into something that left a mark on audiences. Since then, his work has continued to be recognized by film fans and scholars, especially when discussing spaghetti westerns. Van Cleef had a unique ability to bring both danger and charm to his characters, giving them a depth that has helped his work stand the test of time. Whether he was playing a cold-hearted bounty hunter, a smooth-talking outlaw, or a determined lawman, Van Cleef left a strong impression on film history. His roles in The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly and For a Few Dollars More are still considered highlights of the genre, with his characters remembered as some of the most unforgettable in Westerns. Van Cleef's career stands as proof of how someone can rebuild their image, stay committed, and create characters that connect with people long after the final scene. He was, and still is, a key figure in the history of cinema. Van Cleef's influence stretched far beyond his most famous films. While he is best remembered for his roles in spaghetti westerns, his impact reached into other genres as well. He took part in war films, crime dramas, and even science fiction, showing that his range as an actor was far broader than what Hollywood had initially offered him. His appearance in movies like Escape from New York in the 1980s showed that even as trends changed and westerns faded from mainstream popularity, his presence still carried weight. Directors and producers recognized the value of his screen presence and the intensity he brought to his roles, even decades into his career. Younger actors, especially those interested in building careers playing flawed or morally gray characters, often mention Van Cleef as a source of inspiration. His ability to command attention with a look, a pause, or a subtle change in tone became a kind of study in restraint and control. He didn't rely on flashy dialogue or grand gestures to make an impact. Instead, he focused on how to make each moment on screen count. This quality made his characters feel real, even when they existed in stylized or exaggerated settings. His unique face and sharp features became iconic in themselves. Unlike the polished look many leading men had during his time, Van Cleef's look worked in his favor. He appeared believable as both an outlaw and a reluctant hero, and this visual authenticity helped define the feel of the spaghetti westerns. Audiences believed him not because he looked perfect, but because he looked like someone who had lived through what his characters had. Van Cleef also showed that success in Hollywood doesn't always come early or easily. For a long time, he was seen as just another side character, the typecast villain who would never rise beyond supporting roles. But through perseverance, a strong work ethic, and his eventual collaboration with European filmmakers, he turned things around. His story continues to be a reminder that timing, patience, and choosing the right project at the right moment can shift the course of a career. He never received the mainstream awards or accolades that many of his peers did, but that hasn't diminished the respect people have for his work. His performances are still studied in film schools and discussed in documentaries about the evolution of Western cinema. Even today, fans across generations discover his movies and become drawn to his quiet intensity and memorable characters. Lee Van Cleef may not have reached the same commercial heights as John Wayne, but his lasting impact and loyal following prove that recognition isn't always tied to fame. Sometimes, it's about the quality and honesty of the work. In that sense, Van Cleef's legacy stands firm, built not on studio backing or mass appeal, but on talent, craft, and the ability to leave a lasting impression. Over time, film historians began to place more value on the contributions of actors like Van Cleef. Instead of focusing only on box office numbers or award wins, they started examining the roles that helped shape a genre or pushed its boundaries. Van Cleef was one of those actors who didn't just fit into a genre. He helped define and expand it. The way he played morally complex characters changed how Western villains were viewed. They were no longer just one-dimensional bad guys. They had motives, pasts, and even moments of vulnerability. This shift influenced how later filmmakers and actors approached similar roles. Many modern Westerns, especially those made after the 1990s, carry hints of Van Cleef's influence. You can see it in the way characters are written, with deeper flaws and more emotional depth, even if they are on the wrong side of the law. Directors like Quentin Tarantino have openly talked about their admiration for spaghetti westerns and actors like Van Cleef. In Kill Bill, Volume 2, for example, the music and tone borrow heavily from Sergio Leone's style, and the kind of presence that Van Cleef brought to his scenes can be felt in the performances of actors who took on those types of roles. Van Cleef's career also helped open doors for actors who didn't have the classic Hollywood look or background. His success showed that there was a place for unconventional talent, especially in international productions. European directors, particularly in Italy and Spain, gave him leading roles at a time when American studios were still casting him as a side character. This move not only revived his career, but also proved that talent and presence could outweigh image in the right setting. His decision to work with European filmmakers was one of the smartest career choices he ever made. While many actors resisted traveling abroad for work, Van Cleef embraced it. He saw it as a chance to reinvent himself. In films like Day of Anger and Sabata, he played central characters who weren't just tough, they were layered. These films became hits in their own right and gained loyal fan bases across Europe, Latin America, and eventually the United States. Even with all his success, Van Cleef never seemed interested in chasing fame. He didn't make frequent television appearances, rarely gave interviews, and avoided the Hollywood party scene. He lived a more private life, especially in his later years. That might be one of the reasons fans respect him even more. He stayed focused on the work and let his roles speak for themselves. This approach also made his performances feel more grounded. He wasn't trying to win people over off-screen. He just wanted to do the job well. One aspect of Van Cleef's life that often goes unnoticed is his professionalism on set. Many of the directors and co-stars who worked with him described him as dependable and disciplined. He showed up prepared, treated crew members with respect, and didn't act like he was above anyone else. In an industry where ego can often get in the way, Van Cleef's work ethic stood out. He understood the value of being reliable and consistent. That kind of attitude built long-lasting relationships and helped him stay active in the industry even when he wasn't in top-billed roles. He was also surprisingly versatile, despite being strongly associated with Westerns. In Escape from New York, he played a government official who manages to be both threatening and rational, showing that he could still deliver strong performances outside the genre that made him famous. His role in The Octagon, a martial arts film with Chuck Norris, showed once again that Van Cleef's presence could work in different types of stories. He never looked out of place, even in films far removed from the Old West. Today, the appreciation for Van Cleef continues to grow, especially among younger generations discovering classic cinema. Streaming services and restored editions of his films have made his work more accessible than ever. On platforms like YouTube and Reddit, fans frequently share clips, reviews, and discussions about his most iconic scenes. This online presence has helped introduce him to people who weren't even born when his movies were released. His life story also serves as a quiet lesson about persistence and second chances. Few actors have had a career comeback as dramatic as Van Cleef's. After a car accident in the 1950s left him with serious injuries, including a damaged knee, many assumed his career was over. But instead of giving up, he adapted. He accepted different types of roles, worked in foreign markets, and slowly built a new reputation. His perseverance helped him turn what could have been a career-ending event into the beginning of a new chapter. In the final years of his life, Van Cleef remained proud of his body of work. While he never got the kind of widespread fame or critical praise that some of his peers enjoyed, he left behind something more lasting, a connection with audiences. Fans didn't admire him just for being famous. They respected what he brought to every role and the way he made even small moments feel important. When people look back on the golden era of Westerns, Lee Van Cleef's name always comes up. Not as a footnote, but as someone who changed how the genre was seen. He may not have worn the white hat, but he played his part with honesty, intensity, and a clear sense of purpose. And for many fans of Westerns and film history, that's more than enough.